It's the 10% Happier podcast. I'm your host, your guy, Dan Harris. All right, party people, we're back with another episode of Meditation Party. And before we start, let me say this. The more you get into meditation or spirituality or personal development, whatever you want to call it, the more likely you are to encounter concepts that are mysterious, magical, far out, weird, things like superpowers or other realms of existence or reincarnation. And this can be very tricky psychologically for people like me who are constitutionally unable to believe in anything they cannot prove. I will say that over time, I have switched from just straight up dismissiveness to a kind of respectful skepticism or agnosticism. By contrast, my meditation party compadres, Sebene Selassie and Jeff Warren, are way less skeptical, and today they're going to just let loose on these subjects. We, in this episode, have a whole big conversation about magic and mystery and also intuition and tattoos. And then we move on to some other subjects. We're going to take your voicemails and talk about self-hatred, one of my favorite subjects, and also about how to engage in any kind of creative work without being overly attached to the results. And finally, we do a little recommendation segment where we talk about the stuff we're crazy about right now. Seb and Jeff recommend high-minded books and podcasts. I, true to form, recommend a profanity-laden TV show. Before we dive in, just a little bit about Seb and Jeff. Sebene Selassie describes herself as a writer, teacher, and immigrant-weirdo. She teaches meditation on the 10% Happier app and is the author of a great book called You Belong. She's based in Brooklyn. Jeff Warren is also a writer and meditation teacher. He and I co-wrote a book called Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. He also hosts the Consciousness Explorers podcast. He is based in Toronto. He's my favorite Canadian. Also, do not forget to sign up for our meditation party retreat coming up in October at Omega, which is outside of New York City. There are, I'm told, only a handful of tickets left for the in-person event, but a bunch of tickets, I think probably limitless tickets for the online version. There's a link in the show notes. Just a heads up, this party is intended for mature audiences only. A few F-bombs in here, so I apologize in advance for people with sensitive ears or children around. All right, party people, welcome to Meditation Party episode, what is this, 3?
Yes, it is.
All right.
3.
Number 3.
All right.
The magic number.
Oh,
Magic.
Here we go. Here
Funny
we
you
go.
said that.
Yeah. Teeing us right up, Selassee. How are we doing this morning, just to warm us up a little bit?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
It's so great to do these in person and be able to sit with you and look you straight in the eyes. And yeah, so it's really nice to be here. I'm having a really wonderful summer. It's been a little tumultuous in terms of medical info, and it's been really liberating to be with that with some measure of freedom. And I'm doing really well health-wise for those who might have interest in knowing that. And it's been really incredible to not know how I was doing and feel free, and now know that I'm doing well and feel free. And yeah, it's just like, this stuff works, people.
I'm just having a moment of pause because that's a big topic, your health and your attitude about your health. I'm just wondering, I feel tempted to dive into it without letting it just kind of go past it. What do you also, I also don't want to take us too far down a road that we may or may not use in the show. So like, what do you have an intuition, either of you?
Well, one thing that I've been sort of playing with is being really in tune with how I feel versus being dragged by fear or control, which are two sort of mechanisms that operate in my life in tandem. And, that's a huge conversation and a huge process. I've been dealing with cancer for 18 years, so this is not overnight changes. And we've talked about it before on this podcast, and I've written about it. But it's quite moving even to me how far I've come.
More to come on this, I suspect,
Yeah,
as
so.
the show, as the conversation goes forward. Jeff, how are you doing this morning?
I'm really good. I'm very happy to be here, both of you. Sebene's warm eyes make me feel so happy. And yours too, Dan. If I might put my hand on your shoulder at this moment.
I'll lean into that. Yeah, I like that.
Looking at your new tattoo.
Yes, my new tattoo.
We both have new tattoos.
Oh, you have a new one too?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Trust
you guys
life.
are we're all in the verbal school of tattooage.
Yeah, so Seb's one, she has two. Which one's new? And which are they both
They're
new?
both new, yes.
One says they're on her forearm. One says trust with a star next to it, and the other says life with a heart next to it. Which I feel like you're stealing from my brand tone there. And mine is an acronym FTBOAB. Which stands for the benefit of all beings. So I am now fully savvy.
He is official bodhisattva. Friends listening know. So that makes me feel safe about going into the subject matter of today, mystery and magic.
Wait, what's your tattoo?
Oh, I have a bunch. They're all meditation instructions. I have relaxed awareness.
Relaxed is on one wrist, and the awareness is on the other.
And then I have let go, which I got like 20 years ago, and it served me well as a piece of advice. I was thinking of getting hold on the other side just to keep it more balanced. And then I got another one about sensory experience on my back. That's from when I was in my 20s. So yeah, meditation instructions. How else do you remember, put it on your skin?
I should say I have the sun and the moon from my teens and 20s, which is very on brand for me.
Oh, yeah. So on brand.
I'm doing great. Happy to be here with you guys. Slightly hungover. Jeff and I were hanging out last night. We didn't drink any alcohol, but we ate a late dinner, which I never do. And some reason that like messed up my sleep. So I'm a little tired this morning, but otherwise psyched to be spending time with you guys.
Yes, brother.
All right. So subject du jour. I think on episode 1, you guys talked a little bit about how you felt a little nervous letting your respective freak flags fly, talking about how you have some interest in what might be called mysticism or mystery or magic. So we're going to go for it today. We're going to really dive into that stuff. But why are you nervous about it?
It's a good question. I think I come from science. That was my first book, was a lot about neuroscience. I love science. I have a teacher, Shinzen Young, who's very scientifically literate, and he has a very scientific presentation of meditation. It's very rigorous, which I really connected to. And so for the first many years of my way I taught meditation was then that same style of sort of rigorous, only ever, trying to describe what's happening in direct sensory experience, not making any truth claims about the larger world, and being kind of agnostic about some of the more mystical pieces, although not about awakening and the deep transformation. But so I think that was always how I taught. And and because of that, there's always been people who are in that kind of more rational camp who've been attracted to my teachings. And yet, the longer I've practiced, the longer I've taught, the longer I've been in this world, the more, my previous certainties about how the world is have started to soften and erode. And then certain experiential things have come online that are in line with the more mystical, magical, whatever you want to describe, however you want to describe it. And I've been not sure how to talk about that, because I don't want to put off people who might think it's too namby-pamby, weird, like soft thinking. And also I literally do not know what to think about it, because it's not rational. It's not, I've had to develop new models and framings for how to kind of make sense of it for me. And I don't totally understand it. So how do you talk about something you don't understand without making people feel like this guy doesn't really know what he's talking about, which is true. So that would be hence my reservation. There's some stuff I'm happy to talk about, but other pieces I feel like also they're just still coming into some kind of structure. I'm still learning. I'm still in the process of discovering and figuring out what I think is true. Yeah. So that's me. But how about you, Seb?
I think that for me, you're describing sort of the culture we all swim in a way. And I know that there has been a fair amount of assimilation in my life. Because I think I do come from a family and a community where there is more openness to the mystical and mysterious as spiritual experience, even within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is what my mother was a part of. There is just more speaking to God or to Mary or praying and trusting in the power of prayer and miracles and things like that. But just growing up in this culture and having the very important part of science sort of drilled into us, but that becoming the dominant worldview and leaving no room for mystery, I was very much assimilated into that. So even studying religious studies at our alma mater, McGill, it's really a kind of an anthropological, sociological, somewhat scientific, even if it's social science approach. It's not a direct experience.
That's
and
right.
for many years, just religious studies in general really frowned upon. You weren't supposed to be practicing the thing that you taught, especially for comparative religious studies. And so I was, looking at Hinduism and Buddhism, and I had actually an advisor who was a practicing Buddhist, and he wouldn't have been able to teach at certain universities at that time.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
So things are changing
changing.
That, but there's still a tendency, and I know we all know this. We know many meditation teachers, probably all the meditation teachers we know who consult psychics and have
totally.
energy healers
Across
and
the board.
and have had very powerful mystical experiences. And there's something that is censoring all of us to not speak about that publicly, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And those rational defenses that we've all built up because of the culture that we live in that looks at this stuff askew and with question and sometimes with a lot of dismissiveness and really demeaning kind of attitudes, that so we've all learned to not talk about it so that people don't take us not seriously. And so all of that plays into it. But if we look at sort of the history of science, and we can't go into a whole analysis of the structure of scientific revolutions here, but, we think science is this just like progressing narrative when actually there's been lots of question and debate, and a lot of great scientists, including Einstein and physics, tends to lean towards mystery.
Yeah.
Have argued for not throwing out intuition.
Yeah.
Recognizing how much we don't know and really allowing for things. Carl Jung and Albert Einstein had a correspondence for years about astrology and archetypes.
Interesting.
And all of these things that I think the greatest minds who do open to the mystery of the cosmos and the universe realize that there's more going on here than we can just explain through rational, scientific, logical.
Clearly. And that would be a very scientific attitude, actually.
Right.
In a sense that, science is about staying with the open question. There's this, the consolidated knowledge of science is like the yellow egg yolk, but there's this big spread white area that parts of that will be the future science, and parts of it will be discarded as being, cognitive bias and confusion and dead ends, and so there's this expansion
or abuse.
Or sure, yeah.
Because I do think that some of the skepticism comes from having been burnt or seeing other people be burnt by the misuse of interesting ideas that are actually being used to enrich or in some way gratify the proponents of those ideas.
Yeah.
And the challenge is that the same thing could be said of science, which people who study science, who really study the history and philosophy of science know. But unless you're a philosopher in that vein or a weirdo like me or Jeff and might look into that, you wouldn't necessarily know that. That's not the narrative that we hear in the larger culture.
But you don't have to look much further than Tuskegee.
Right.
To find examples of science being misused.
Or Henrietta Lacks.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead, bud.
I was going to say, let's just get into the magic and mystery so we know what we're talking about here, because this is the cool stuff.
Yes.
Right.
Let me just say one last thing in terms of throat clearing here, because I do want to get into the actual magic. I want to own that I think I'm part of the problem here historically, because I have this propensity to be dismissive, and so I think reflexively write off things as bullshit. In part because of a closed-mindedness, in part I think because of an assimilation into a scientific materialistic worldview, and I think also in part of as a result of having been a journalist and watching people take these ideas and exploit other people with these ideas. So it's, I think, a cocktail. And I think over time, my attitude has shifted to a respectful agnosticism, or a Joseph Goldstein, my meditation teacher, is always talking about the Coleridge line of the willing suspension of disbelief. And so it's more like, I don't know, I don't know. That's genuinely where I'm at now. So having put that out there, Seb, I'll pick on you first. What's the weird shit that you believe in?
I just want to say that I really appreciate what you're saying, and there's this line between dismissiveness and skepticism.
Yes.
We don't want to throw out doubt.
Yes.
That's a very useful, just like we don't throw out fear, even if we want to work with our fear in a wise way. So
there's a middle path. You know, like the epigram in my first book was a quote from one of my favorite indie rock bands of the 80s, the Meat Puppets. And the line was, open up your mind and in pours the trash. And so like that is true, but it's also true that if you open up your mind, in pours like a bunch of diamonds. And so it's like figuring out, when do you, bring in the doubt or skepticism, and when do you take a leap?
Yeah. So for me, the direct knowing of things, it's not really about belief, right? Because some people could say, oh, you believe in these things. But as one of my favorite quotes from French philosopher Bruno Latour said, a modern is someone who believes that others believe. Like we all believe things, but what do we know? And so from just over the years, even from when I was very young, and we've talked about psychedelics on this show, my experiences with psychedelics, which is often a way that a lot of people open up to other ways of knowing. And it's hard to talk about them because they're not rational. They're hard to put into words. The intuitive is often wordless and experiential. But I've had direct experience of this reality not being as solid as we experience it to be on a day-to-day level, and knowing that my 5 ordinary senses might not be giving me the full picture of what's happening here. So there's that, just in terms of the material reality shifting and changing through these deep experiences, including meditation. I also have had numerous experiences over many years, and decades ago, I dismissed them or just kind of filed them away, that some would call psychic. I've heard the saying that everyone is psychic. Not everyone is necessarily a medium. Not everyone can sort of communicate with other realms, but everyone has the power of intuition. And even if you think of it just scientifically, if, as Einstein said, time is just a persistent illusion, that we're sort of existing in ways that we only experience as moving in a linear way, but there's actually a lot of knowing that can happen across time and space because we have these intuitive capacities. So I have had dreams that then things have happened later. I've had knowing of things that then happened after the fact. I've sort of known things about people before they've communicated them to me. I know all your dark and dirty secrets, both of you.
I feel naked.
No, and
I am naked, actually. I didn't want to mention nothing on below the waist here. You can't see. Just like a little breeze down there.
But these are, I can't explain these experiences, and I am trying to open up to them more. So I'm actually working with a friend of mine who has had psychic experiences her whole life. She comes from a family where this is common, and I sit with her, and and she talks to me about it and helps me understand what's going on for me, and start to explore this more, start to try and energetically open up these channels by just opening to my intuition, pretty much every morning, just sort of being there. And my meditation practice now includes this just deep listening to what might be wanting to be known that my rational defenses have closed off to in the past. And not having sort of a fixation on where that's coming from, or if it's coming from a particular ancestor or being, but being open to that channel, basically. As you both know, I also have a deep love of astrology, which is a very misunderstood, but growing in popularity, philosophy, technology, experiential understanding of the universe that really acknowledges that we have a relationship with the cosmos, and that these particular planets in our galaxy, or in our solar system rather, have a relationship to the Earth. And we cannot go into the history of astrology right now, but there is a long history of from ancient times. Every culture has a relationship with the planets and a way of understanding their relationship with what's happening here on Earth.
Didn't Jung call it the world's first psychology?
Yes.
Yeah, astrology.
That's great. I love that. Yeah. And it's a really complex, beautiful way of understanding our own psychology, but also I know that you love the work of Richard Tarnas too, of understanding planetary trends and experiences, especially with the outer planets, which have that more sort of social and larger cultural effects. And to understand that takes a lot of time and listening and study, but it's a really profound, deeply profound. Jeff and I often exchange texts about astrology, and
somehow I'm left off those.
Weirdly. I'm interested in talking a little bit more about astrology, but I also don't want to let pass the whole first piece of what you said around intuition and beginning to trust these. I guess these intuitions, or this way of knowing that's coming up through you. And I had a question about that. As someone who tries to pay attention, I guess, to my intuitions about things, I find it hard to know what is a genuine intuition versus somehow an aspiration that I want, or, you know what I mean? Like, how do you separate the signal from the noise in there? I'm curious how you do that, because I don't have confidence in that for myself.
I don't have confidence yet either. And it's really a lot like meditation practice, that it's something that I just keep returning to, and I have to remind myself to return to it and create pathways, in the same way that we discover what types of meditation practices or postures or what time of day works for us. I try and find the openings and channels for that intuitive knowing. So we were, before we started recording, talking about ritual. So I have certain things that I use or do, including oracle cards, and not because these objects are somehow imbued with magic, but they're like in every culture, whether it's tea leaves or coffee grounds or things that allow us to start to witness patterns and synchronicities and opening up those intuitive vibrations that are otherwise not known to us in a rational, material way.
You make me think of this really important point. This is something that I think about a lot, which is that, and this is, I think, true in meditation, maybe how you know a practice is working isn't necessarily an effect you're having that's happening in the moment. It has to do with how your life is. Are you happier, more fulfilled, more connected? Do you feel like there's more meaning? And maybe when it comes to certain kinds of ritual practice or intuition, it's similar. You may never totally have you may never know if this effect is what's true, but in believing it to be so, in treating it as meaningful, then the effect it has on your life is this very positive effect. And therefore, that's all the validation you need. You see, there's a famous essay William James wrote, of course, father of psychology, called The Will to Believe. And it was kind of along these lines. I mean, my read of it, and I'm not like a William James academic, but is that you may, when it comes to the biggest picture ideas about how we connect to the world, how mind connects to cosmos, which is, nobody really understands. You can go to consciousness conferences that are with open-minded mystics and embodied psychologists and philosophers and neuroscientists, and they're talking about this question. So since we don't know conclusively how that is, maybe that it's okay to choose to believe something that based on what makes you most happy, what makes you most fulfilled, what makes you most healthy. Because you can't know if that's true or not, then why not make the imminently sensible decision to choose to believe the one that leads to the most connection and happiness? You know what I mean? And believing that you're connected in a more meaningful way to the larger world is inherently, better stance, and look at the problems we have as a culture because we haven't believed that, because we believe we're separate and now we can treat the earth however we want. Am I getting a little too ADHD here? Are you following my?
No, it's really powerful. And it's very empowering. And one of the things, I'm currently teaching a course about ritual and intention. And one of the deep dives we did is into placebos. And I just read this book by Catherine T. Hall called Placebos. It's part of an MIT press series, which is basically science for dummies. And it is fascinating. The way we dismiss placebos, and it's just a placebo effect. It's a placebo effect.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
Placebos are being shown to have equal, if not greater effect in so many conditions.
The belief effect. That's how Dylan Evans, I think his name is, taught. He had a book about placebo called The Belief Effect.
Pain, inflammation, IBS, depression, anxiety, some Parkinson's symptoms, PTSD, some surgeries have placebos effects. Wow. And so what I love about her take is that there's an ethical issue here because there are also nocebos. Right? So if you learn about the side effects of a drug, which as a doctor or as a clinician, you have to tell people what the side effects are, you are more likely to get those side effects. And so the power of the mind, why she asked the question, why don't we just give placebos? And they've done these tests too, where you give someone a placebo and tell them it's a placebo and that it'll work just as well. And it has this effect. So this power that you're speaking to is the power of expectation.
Exactly.
And the power of context, right? Because it's the white lab coat or the surgical theater that really is the power. And our minds are so powerful. And so this power of intuition is part of that. It's allowing us to sort of break the barrier beyond what we think is material reality, which, again, physics and other scientific understandings are showing us is way more than what we can see, hear, feel, and touch on a daily basis.
Yeah. Oh, this is so interesting. So when I think about the mystery, I think of kind of two levels. Level one is the first unbelievable mystery that you can awaken in this life. That you can. What do you mean by awaken? You can begin to experience self and world not from a position of separation or isolation, but from a position of true integration. And that is real, and that you can function just fine in the world without necessarily this ego agenda, even a sense of your own boundaries, a sense of yourself in time and space. And this is not me, but as you talk to certainly more advanced teachers and practitioners that I've known in my life, talk about experiencing reality in that way, and that's already fascinating. And I think you can make a case from a point of view straight up neurobiology. I mean, this is all. You're doing something, it's affecting the brain, you're able to come into different kind of state of consciousness, and there's no reason that can't be understood within the existing paradigm of science. But that's level one. Level two is basically the God level. Level two is that not only are you in an interactive, that you are in an interactive relationship with reality, that you're not an actor over here and the world's over there, and there's only causal things happening, that moment to moment, things are organized in a profoundly meaningful way. And the intentions you have effects on the world, or appear to have effects on the world. And the things the world do, I mean, it's all part of one mysterious tableau. And so this is where I come to my personal experience. Like my personal experience, like I just taught a retreat at Omega, and my experience is I'm sitting in the middle of all these people, and at this exact moment, I know that this is the teaching that wants to happen, and then someone in the room says that exact thing, and then I know that exactly the next thing that needs to be said, and then that's said by someone else on the other side of the room, and exactly at that moment, a bird flies across the window, and a shadow falls and a light falls across one half of the room. And I can't explain it other than to know I feel like I'm in this space that's completely charged with meaning, that everything is organized perfectly as a kind of tableau. And the meaningness of it is so rich and fulfilling. And there's no question I have inside that's, I know this is true. This is what's happening. I don't need to make any truth claims about any one of those things. But my point is that in any one moment, reality is organizing itself in this perfect, meaningful way that you're part of. And that's where astrology comes in. That's where the I Ching comes in. That's where intuition comes in. That's where all the contemplative insights about living vertically in the moment, that's where that comes in to me. That's a whole other order of reality that's reflective and synchronous as opposed to causal and linear. And I think we live in both those kinds of realities. And getting a chance to experience that other one that's been the most meaningful times of my life. And I want other people to be able to share in that. And I don't think you have to let go of that other mode of reality that's also equally true. It's paradoxical. It's like the absolute and the relative. They're both simultaneously true, and it's part of the paradox is it's bigger than your mind can get its head around. So just surrender and then see what happens, And that's the other thing. See what happens. Do don't take my word for it. Do the practices. Begin to act in a more interactive way with the world. See how that makes you feel. If it leads you down into a deluded, have some feedback from community, because it can lead you down into delusion and weird biases. And there's no doubt, that famous line, the mystic swims in the same waters in which the psychotic drowns. There's a way to be in that kind of magical thinking world that is deeply unhealthy, obviously. But there's also a way to be in it that is deeply, deeply healthy and loving and life-giving.
One of the challenges of interviewing you is that sometimes you drop things, and then you drop things that I want to follow up on, but then 75 other things come afterwards. So, no, it's okay. But I want to represent the listener here, because you used a couple phrases that people might not know. I Ching and absolute and relative.
Okay. You want to try absolute and relative? I'm happy to talk about the I Ching.
Yes, well, this is what I talk about in the book.
Exactly.
People think
which book?
You Belong. Yeah. And, people were like, oh, she wrote a book about belonging. It's about, fitting in, or about just race and culture. But the premise of the book is that paradox is the portal. Yeah. There are paradoxes, people get used to it. And this central paradox of life is the absolute and the relative. The absolute being that there is this mystery. There's this fundamental interconnection, inextricable, bound together quality that all the great mystics and indigenous cultures, as well as these modern scientific understandings, are telling us. That is true. It's also true that we're individual, separate beings with identities and realities and experiences, and both are true.
Yeah. The one and the many is another way to talk about it. Both are true.
Yes, both are true.
There's one reality that we all participate in. That's unquestionable. That's by definition what one reality is, and it's experienced in all of these manifold different ways.
Yes. And this is a central teaching in Buddhism as well, the paradox of the two truths. So that paradox is a paradox. Like it's, we're not going to find this rational explanation about why both are true. And that going into this conversation with an understanding of paradox is imperative for not going crazy. But I want to hear about the I Ching, but I want to hear from you, Dan, Jeff and I have just said a lot of words, and it might be a word salad, you know. And what are your thoughts about it?
You can talk about intuition in a way that might strike people as mystical and unobtainable, but I mean, and maybe I'm dumbing it down too far, but I kind of think about it as like listening to the intelligence that exists below the neck. So listening to your body, and which in itself can be an annoying cliche. But as I often say, cliches become cliche for a reason because they're true. And I ever told you the story about what happened to me in college with my then girlfriend? Did I tell it on the show?
I don't know. I don't think so. I've heard you tell it before, but it's great.
Yeah,
tell it again.
I was sophomore year in college. I attended a liberal arts college in Maine, Colby College. But I didn't quite fit in there, speaking of belonging. And so I took a lot of semesters away. And so second half of sophomore year, I did a semester in Washington, D.C. It was my first experience actually in television news. And my girlfriend at the time was still at Colby. And she called me one night and said, I want to break up. And I freaked out and asked my boss for a day off. On a Thursday night, I drove through the night to get to Maine first thing in the morning to plead my case. And somewhere, I think along the New Hampshire-Maine border, I started to feel really sick. And I just felt off. Something was off. And I didn't really listen to it. Showed up at her dorm first thing in the morning, knocked on the door, and she opened the door and she, like, all the blood drained from her face, and she kind of pushed me out into the hallway and whatever. We had a chat, and then ultimately I got into the room and I opened I saw on the floor a pair of LL Bean shoes that were way too big for her. And I opened the closet, and crouching on the floor was one of my fraternity brothers.
Oh, no, dude.
Really bad. Really bad. And it was like a huge formative moment for me. And I think of it now in many ways, but one of them was that my body was trying to tell me something. Yeah. I knew something was off. I mean, obviously I knew it from her telling me she wanted to break up, but there was something else I knew. And so I don't know. To me, I think of intuition within a pretty simple, down-to-earth framework of, the body's sending us signals all the time, but because we have this racing, egoic mind that's like keeping the world out often so that we can get shit off of our to-do list, we fail to see those signals. And sometimes we fail so successfully that the body just goes into total revolt. Anyway, so now I'm yammering, but that's my view of this.
What if we have a small body and then we have the big body? The big body is reality. So synchronicities, things like that, that's the big body telling us something. And intuitions and feelings like you have, that's the small body telling us something. I mean, I'm just tripping there a little bit, but
no, that makes sense.
It has a nice elegance.
Yes.
I love when you trip.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would also add, I was trained as a coach with certain influences, and one is the Enneagram, which talks about three centers: the thinking center, the feeling center. So I'm pointing at my head, the thinking center; my heart, the feeling center; and my belly is the sensing center. And
what's the difference between feeling and sensing?
So feeling more like emotions.
Okay.
Sensing more the sensations of the body. And I feel I'm a very heart-centered person from,
another of my favorite terms.
We could explain that astrologically because I have a lot of water in my chart. We could explain it.
Me too, girl.
What's that?
I said me too, girl.
Yeah. and
means he's referring to his prostate issues. He's peeing a lot.
Yeah, I didn't think we were going to talk about that on this episode, but let's go there.
You too. So I wonder too if it's these emotional resonances, because that's also been shown to have correspondence, right, between how people's heartbeats sync, even in a theater full of strangers, of course, with the people that we know and love. but that we have these different ways of knowing, and practicing our intuition is actually practicing those other ways of knowing. And even if we are more sensory based, for people who actually have this sensory, we pick up on something in our gut feeling we talk about, right? Or if we're more emotionally centered, everybody in this culture is trained to go up into their head.
Yeah.
So not to dismiss thinking, but we're all pretty well practiced at thinking. And part of opening up to intuition is starting to connect with our heart or emotions, feelings, and with our sensory experiences.
Big time.
What sensations are we having?
Intuition, though, seems like something you can tap into without lapsing into magic or mystery.
But what is intuition?
I mean, Dan's saying it could be that the gut knows something.
How does the gut know?
Because it's connected by a network of neurons to the brain, and it's part of the extended nervous system.
Across the New Hampshire-Maine border?
Yeah. Because
she's kicking my ass over here, Jeff.
Because
Help me
there's
out.
invisible neurons going from Dan's stomach to that dude in the, who's not in the closet at that point. Sorry, Dan.
No, I got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you're right. I don't know.
Well, that's the big body. That's the big body.
Yeah.
Well, so, yeah. Well,
what's the I Ching?
So the I Ching is some people call it the world's oldest computer. It's an ancient Chinese divination system that was old when Lao Tzu was walking China. So it's one of the bases of Taoism. And it was traditionally done with, I think, sticks or bones. You threw them, and what you do is then it became coins, and now you can do it on an app, on many apps, which I do all the time. And what you're doing is you are in the app example, since that's probably the one most contemporaries would use, you pose a question, not a yes or no question. You just sort of, what I use is I state a situation. So I might say, I might have a conversation coming up with Sebene, and I might just say, Sebene. I just kind of want to, and the idea is that I'm doing it to try to get a little bit more context or sense or an understanding of how to approach this conversation I'm going to have with Sebene. So I just maybe put her name down, and then I would tap the screen 6 times. This is in the app. What I'm doing is I'm throwing the coins 6 times. And each time I throw it, I get either a straight line, a broken line, or something called a changing line, 2 forms of that. And regardless, I won't go into the technical, you get a hexagram. There are 64 hexagrams in the I Ching. Each hexagram there's a sort of pithy, wise saying or framing around it. The I Ching was created for governors of China. It's very practical. It's about how to make decisions in a military way or in different contexts, but you get a kind of reading. And the reading might say, it might be shock. It's like some massive surprise is about to happen, or and it kind of gives you depending on the translation, a kind of description of shock. And then there are some extra stuff there you can read at the bottom. Or it might say increase. Whatever's happening, there's more of it's coming, and it's building up, and it gives you specifics around that. Or another one might say nearing completion. The situation at hand is about to shift into another situation. So you do 1 hexagram. There's almost always a second hexagram that tells you kind of how the energies in the situation are changing, what it's moving into. Some people say the second hexagram is more the implicit read, and the first one's more the explicit surface read. Regardless, what it amounts to for me, first of all, it's never not helpful. That in almost any situation, and I'll often consult the I Ching, and the framing I get, it almost always helps me unblock whatever it was I was unsure about, or it gives me more helpful context, and I'm able to go into approach the situation in a way that is just, I get better outcomes, and I've been using I Ching, I hate to use the word, but religiously for at least 3 years now, 2 or 3 years. And it's been this incredible tool in my life. It's just been so helpful, and I have complete confidence in it. And I don't understand how it works, because I know it's a random number generator. I have a model for how it works, and I just tried to articulate it earlier. Like, it's not causal. There's no Chinese sage trying to give me good advice, like floating it down from heaven or from the heavens. Or I just more see it as in every moment, if you just freeze the frame of the moment, it's like each moment is like a picture. It's like a painting. Every element in the painting has a role in the composition. There's the shadowy part over here and the sun there and the landscape here and you're there, and it's meaningfully connected. And so in any one moment, I have an intention to my inner world is interested in something, and I throw the I Ching, and then the outer world has this random response that is never less meaningful to my thing. And that's how I see it with the organization of the planets and astrology too. I see that as being the same thing. At any one moment, flash. These planets are in these different positions in the sky. You're in this position in your life. You're psychically in this conundrum. And it all has a kind of, there's a kind of fluency or reflectiveness where every element, as above, as below, everything is reflected meaningfully in everything else. You see what I mean? It's not causal. It's not like, oh, this planet is tugging your neurons and making you look more like that. That's why you're born watery. Or forget causal. It's the simultaneousness of the moment that has a kind of logic or intelligence. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just kind of how my take on it. And the takeaway, though, for me is it works. It works for me. I don't know if it's true. I wouldn't try to make some argument that it's empirically true. I could easily show you how every one of those could be a coincidence, it's just me reading this into a situation. I could as well read something else into a situation. But again, like I was saying before, the proof in the pudding for me is not its objective truth, whatever that is. Is it valuable in my life, and has it played a meaningful role that's supported me? And it certainly has done that. So therefore, I continue to use the I Ching, and I will probably continue to use it for the rest of my life. and people who I've put onto it have gotten a lot from it too. So, that's my take.
I appreciate that.
And it's super mystical and magical. I mean, I can't even believe that I'm doing this. The 10-year-old version of me would have been like, this is the most like absurd magical thinking, I would have made the obvious protest that, you're going to find the evidence that you need for that moment. I could have gotten any hexagram and I could find something that's true in that. And I can't argue with that, but I can say, taking it as a legitimate source of meaning and insight in my life has created enormous value.
Just keep I appreciate that a lot. Just keeping my eye on the clock here. I want to ask one last question at the very least. And there's a lot more we can say, but this is a huge topic, but we're not going to tackle it all today. But just to bring it back to something we talked about at the beginning of the show, Seb, you talked about some pretty, my word, not yours, miraculous stuff that's been going on vis-a-vis your own health. You've been dealing with cancer for 18 years. You had some signs a few months ago that things were not looking good. And then all of a sudden you got a PET scan and it looked like actually things are going really, really well. And do you attribute any of this, or maybe even just maintain some openness to there being a mysterious, magical element to it?
That's not the first time. I mean, those of who have known my cancer journey, that I've had many, including in 2021 when you saw me very, very sick. And the improvements I had were so fast. And one thing I like about my current oncologist is she's very smart and she's very rational. And she's also very open to not understanding what's happening. And she's the one that made the connection at that time that there's no way that the few drugs I was not eligible for chemo or radiation at that point. The few things I was doing could not account for what was happening so quickly, including, my lung reinflating on its own and, these incredible events. And I don't know, I can't say it's causal. Right? I don't know. And that's where I really open up to the mystery, because I'm also hesitant to say that if you just have less fear or don't give in to the fear as much or don't try and control things, that suddenly everything will be okay. That's not true. It's not true for most of us. It hasn't been true for me in the past. But I am willing to open to whatever possibilities, including prayer and meditation and receiving the well wishes and healing energies of people around me I'm not saying those are the causes of it, but I stay open to that mystery and to the possibilities that being open to that mystery brings. And what you were describing, Jeff, every culture in the planet has these divination, quote unquote, techniques, including just straight up meditation. But all those are really opening to those channels of intuition. It's like opening to the Maine, New Hampshire border, which is what we're forever going to call mystery from now on.
All right. That was well said, Seb. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, just appreciating Sebene. Yeah.
I appreciate both of you. This is a huge subject, and we're going to come back to it in future parties, undoubtedly. I would just to tie a ribbon around it for now, just echo what Seb said about this word openness. I just think that this is another example where, as if we needed more of the importance of intellectual humility and cognitive flexibility and having an open mind. The Buddha is said to have said something to the effect of, people who cling to opinions wander the world, annoying other people. And I have been that person, annoying other people. So it feels better to be open. And so let's close it for now on that.
Right before we close it, can I just loop it around to the listeners? People are listening to 10% Happier podcast, at least a big chunk of them, because they're interested in meditation. They're meditators. They're thinking of becoming meditators. I have found, like with so many people and with myself, the more you meditate, the more these things become pertinent things in your life. The more it's sort of like, I don't know how to explain it, but there's something that opens through this process. And certain subtleties that you may have been happening under the radar start to become more apparent. And there's a reason why so many people who meditate start to get ever more open to these kinds of experiences and ways of thinking and knowing. So, and there is a big connection there, you know, and we're all headed there if you're meditating.
All of a sudden I'm the guy with a "for the benefit of all beings" tattoo. Next step, sunglasses with a third eye for my third eye. All right. When we come back, we're going to take some questions from listeners.
Yes.
And we've got some good ones, some juicy ones. So we'll be right back. All right, we're back with segment 2, which we call "What's Your Problem?", where you get to leave us a voicemail. We'll tell you how to do that soon. If you want to do it in the future, you leave us a voicemail. We solve all of your problems, and you're good. So today we've got 2 people who've called in that we've selected their message. We actually got a lot of messages. We've selected 2 of them. If you're watching this instead of listening, if you're watching us on YouTube, you notice that we've got our headphones on. That's because we want to be able to hear it when we play the voicemail. And the first one has to do with what we're calling non-efforting, which is a typically unmellifluous Buddhist term. So here's the voicemail.
Hi, this is Krista from Chicago. May you live with ease is one of my all-time favorite invocations in metta practice. And yet living with ease, or non-efforting, as I've heard it described, seems at odds with doing anything that's inherently challenging. As a painter, I go through plenty of mental gymnastics just to get myself in the studio. And then during the work itself, the normal struggles of not knowing how to do something or not turning out the way I want it, to the uncertainty of it all while trying to stay wholly unattached to the outcome. So I would love to hear you all talk about your creative work and how you manage the seeming contradiction between struggle or frustration and non-effort and ease. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the work you're all doing and sharing.
Thank you, Krista. That's a great question. 2 just definitional things here. Well, one definitional and one sort of contextual. The definitional thing is, if you're listening to this or watching this and you haven't heard the term metta before, M-E-T-T-A, that's a Buddhist term. It has to do with, it's often translated as loving kindness, or I like this one better, friendliness. It's just this innate capacity, trainable capacity we all have to give a shit about other people or have some well wishes. And in formal meditation practice, one of the phrases you send to your meta targets is, may you live with ease. The context I want to set before we talk about this is that creativity can be broadly understood. It doesn't just mean doing something artistic, or the three of us have written books. It can mean, planning how you're going to handle some conversation you need to have, or a job change, or how you're going to drive to your next location. Creativity, I think, should be broadly understood. So everybody should feel like they belong in this discussion. Anyway, okay. So for me, I, like everybody else at this table, write books, and I spend a lot of time suffering while I'm writing books. And I often try to bulldoze my way to the answer, because writing is basically just, for me, in my experience, going through a long series of problems, from a sentence structure to the structure of the whole book to the structure of the chapter. You just constantly bumping up against these problems that need to be solved, and often they seem impossible to solve. And I have spent a lot of time making myself miserable in this situation. And I had a really good conversation with Joseph Goldstein, who I often invoke, my longtime meditation teacher. And I was telling him about how, I stand at my computer, and I was saying I'll stand at my computer and just be, clenched up. And he, and I have this subconscious belief, even though I don't think it's correct, that this is the only way to figure anything out. And he said, this idea that you need to clamp down in order to figure anything out, that's just you being stupid. And then he laughed, one of his mischievous laughs. And he said, here's a good little mantra for you. The good stuff doesn't come from the clench. And you should, while you're working, just kind of gently listen to your body while you're working. And when you notice the clench coming up, that's just a signal to ease up a bit. And what I've noticed is, to the extent that I can monitor my body while I'm writing, I'm always clenching. And so I've really gotten good at just, tossing a ball around in my office. Like, I keep a tennis ball in there, or hurling myself on the ground, playing with my son, playing with cats, just as a way to, I'm pretty consistent about coming back to the work, but when I notice myself getting overly coiled, that's my move. I said a lot there. Does any of that make any sense, what I'm saying?
Makes sense to me. Yeah. And I just, I want to honor that there is struggle in writing. It's not writing. You can get in these wonderful states of flow where it's just pouring out and it's great. And then you read it and you're like, that could use an editor. So there's a place for that second guessing, the struggle, the going over it. I think you kind of need both. But it's definitely true, if you allow that struggle part to be part of the process, then it will be, by definition, less struggle. It's kind of like what you're doing. It's like you can create more ease inside the more challenging parts of the work.
Yeah, and it's so related to our practice, our meditation practice. It's so similar, to allow what's there to be there. And to me, in the question, I heard a lot of sort of just inner critic speaking harsh words and ideas about how things should be. It should be smoother, it should be easier, it should be going much better. And sometimes it's not. As Jeff was saying, there is struggle involved too. And for me, I found that, especially with writing or creative output, I need to create a lot of spaciousness, not just internally, like also structurally. Have space for that jumping on a trampoline, or lying down on the ground and just sort of crying. There's this meme of people who read, and it's like these two people who look very put together, and people who write, and they just look like crazy, like so crazy true. Eyes. And that's part of the process. And so creating the spaciousness around that is both external and internal.
So living with ease doesn't mean there's no struggle. It just means, can you have some equanimity and ease around the struggle that is inherent in life?
Yes.
Thank you again, Krista. So our next caller has a really good question about something that really resonates with me about sometimes fearing you're a bad person. All right, let's listen to that.
When I sit down to meditate, I am instantly bombarded by thoughts of all the truly bad things I have done in my life. Are these things that I should be trying to avoid focusing on, or do I need to work through them to get to the next level of my meditation?
Feels weird throwing this to you, Seb, first, because you're one of the best people I know, but what you're rolling your eyes. I meant that sincerely. You think I'm joking?
I just know it not to be true.
Well, I'm not saying you're perfect.
Yes. Yeah. I can really relate to this. And this harks back to that inner critic. I really have such high standards for myself about how I should be in relationship, in my own life. And when that has come up, it's really been important for me to ground into the present moment, because it's really taking me usually to the past, right? About how I should have done something. And to me, that's pointing to something that's happening in the present moment, that would come up. There's some feeling, and I mean that both in terms of emotions and sensation, that there's something happening in my body. And to stay with that rather than getting lost in the story, and I'm talking about the meditation practice itself, to really track what it is. And for many years, it was a lot of tightness in my heart.
Yeah.
There's a lot of holding and tension in the heart space, and just simply even opening up, as many people know, and I'm a big proponent of lying down meditation practice, exactly because it allows us to open up more freely and easily and have the ground or the floor or whatever's underneath us support that. And just even that, like breathing into the belly and chest and relaxing, helps some of that, the physical tension releasing helps some of that mental and emotional tension releasing. Then there's the work of therapy and exploration around those stories I have about myself being a bad person that can happen sometimes as an investigative process during meditation. You might use RAIN. I know you've had episodes and conversations about RAIN. Tara Brach teaches RAIN beautifully. It's an acronym for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And using certain practices to then work with those thoughts or emotions that are arising might happen. But a lot of times the actual work around those stories happens outside of meditation practice for me.
Yeah, for me, when this comes up in meditation, I always think focus towards or focus away. And there are many strategies. If I want to focus towards it and open to it and do self-compassion and some of what you're describing, that sometimes is the right move. But other times, I don't have the energy for this right now, or just there's a feeling in which you don't feel like that's the time is right, and you don't have to. You can focus away. You can focus on your breath, or you can focus on the sense of being of the ground. Or you can open your eyes. And this is kind of a really important thing to know. That you can choose to focus on something else. That's kind of the first freedom of meditation, that you don't have to inevitably be inside, the thing that's in the foreground. You can choose something more in the background. It can become the new foreground. And so that's okay too, if you don't feel like you want to go there at any one time. It's like, not like you have to.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I don't want to assume the gender of the person speaking, but there are also gendered aspects to women always needing to be nice and really beating ourselves up for moments where we've expressed anger or drawn boundaries or even leaned into our rage, and those are all natural experiences of all humans, and we're not always all going to be nice or quote unquote good. And so that training and those messages around being a good girl are really we all have to work through them, and that's also true for guys. And I know, Dan, you should speak to this because I know you have some stories about yourself being an asshole, which is are not true.
I mean, there have been times where it's true, but I don't think that it's holistically true. I actually, one of the things that has really popped up into my head many times when I've been tempted to write myself off as an asshole or actually more recently other people, is something that Father Gregory Boyle said to me on this show once. If people are unfamiliar with him, he has written a bunch of, he's a priest who lives in and works in LA, where he works with current and former gang members. And he has written a bunch of books. One of them is called Tattoos on the Heart. Anyway, I asked him once about this, and he said, I don't believe in evil. I believe in bad behavior. So I found that to be very useful.
Yeah, I didn't say you don't act like an asshole. I said you are not.
Holistically an asshole. Yes. Yeah, no, I understood. Well, you once said to me, you're not an asshole, you're a knucklehead.
That sounds like me.
I like that. Knucklehead's kind of sexy.
Yeah, well, really isn't. Great questions. And I want to encourage you, everybody, to hit us up with more questions. Get life advice from 3 questionable characters.
Highly questionable.
Yeah. Here's our number, 1-508-656-0540, 508-656-0540, or you can send voice memos to us at podcast@10percent.com, TENPERCENT.com. We'll put links to, we'll put that information in the show notes for you. All right, we'll be right back with our recommendation segment. We've been trying to figure out what to call that segment. I liked Kool-Aid. Some people didn't like that because of its unfortunate historical antecedents, but whatever. It's my fucking show.
What a dick.
Yeah, what an asshole, actually. Knucklehead. All right, we'll be right back. All right, we're back with our final segment where we recommend shit that we're really excited about right now. So we'll go around the horn, starting with Seb.
So I have been listening to a lot of, I think it's called binaural beats. Do you know this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally.
Heard of that.
Yeah, and I don't know the science around this. I know that there's some question to whether they're really effective or not. I first got turned on to them years ago, actually, by Jonathan Faust, who's an amazing meditation teacher. He also happens to be married to Tara Brach, and he's a great guy and has lots of good recommendations for random things. So he turned me on to that, and I remember downloading an app. This was years ago, and I used it a little bit, but now you can find these playlists. I have multiple Spotify playlists with these binaural beats downloaded onto my phone. There are ones for concentration or flow states. There are ones for sleep and relaxation, and there are all sorts of things. It's, a rabbit hole. And I use them. So you have to listen to them with headphones on. They don't sort of work just spatially. And they're working on the premise. To me, it sounds like sort of similar to how EMDR works, which is a form of therapy that has been shown to have huge effects for PTSD and for all sorts of trauma, and been used with veterans and other people. And I've used EMDR. I worked with an EMDR therapist after my mom died to deal with some traumatic images, memories that I was having of that experience, and it was very effective. And that works on sort of a binaural alternating pattern, whether it's sound. In the case of these binaural playlists, music playlists, I used actually sensory process. So I had these pulsating sensors in my hands working with this therapist as I reimagine certain situations, and that sort of rewires the brain. It feels like magic, talking about magic. But I use these when I'm writing. And so I'll put, the flow state one playlist of Spotify or whatever it is. And I find that it really helps me focus. And I use them sometimes before I go to bed. I have fallen asleep with them in my ears. And sometimes when I've used the relaxation ones during the day, I'll fall asleep. Like it'll put me into, and I don't know if that's quote unquote placebo or if there's something actually happening, but they seem to be really effective, and invite people to check it out.
Very interesting. I checked into those a little bit when I was writing Head Trip years ago, and but the technology is just, I was looking at the science. There wasn't a lot of science papers at that time, but now there's apparently a lot more, and the technology's really jumped up on that. Interesting. Well, I'm going to give a couple of recommendations that to loop back to our woo conversation, our conversation about magic. Sebene turned me on to Carolyn Casey, who is an astrologer who has an audio series called Visionary Activist Astrology, which I'm now in my second listening. I find it so incredibly brilliant. She's a semiotician from Brown University, who she describes as being covert at Brown, secretly interested in studying archetypes and different systems of, I guess, thinking about the world in different ways, however you want to describe it. But this series is superb, especially if you jump over the first 2 or 3 tracks and get into her description of each planet. And each planet, it's a way into talking about a whole aspect of being human. So Saturn is like kind of about challenge and having your conditioning come up and how you work with it. And Jupiter is about expansion and ritual and ceremony. And, and so another one's about imagination. I think it's Neptune. And so, what it is it's sort of like these deep, she's so smart, she's so literate, she's so funny and quirky. And it's these deep, literate, humanistic, educated takes on this prism on human nature and what she's learned about working with people. And I just find it so, like, I've written so many notes about it. I found it so complementary to my meditation practice. And it's very literary, it's very humanistic literary. So it appeals to that part of me too. So highly recommend that. I think you have to get it on Audible or something. And then just because I mentioned I Ching, there's a great podcast called Weird Studies. I don't know if you ever listened to it. These 2 awesome guys, one's an academic, and so I think they're both Canadian. One's a filmmaker in Ottawa. Very smart, funny guys. And it's the podcast. It's basically about the magical. It's smart, educated, irreverent takes on different aspects of the magical. And they have an episode on the I Ching that was what originally got me into the I Ching. So I recommend starting there. But it's episodes on David Lynch and Lost Highway, or on, I don't know, UFOs, on the tarot, on but very smart takes too, just like trying to intelligently wrestle with for them the reality of living in a more magical world and how to think about that. And there, of course, are so many academic interesting rationalizations and genuine insights within that, and they're kind of swimming in those waters. So Weird Studies, highly recommended. Find it on any podcast. Those are my 2 happy places right now.
Those are good. Mine's much more pop culture, and this is going to sound like a recommendation from May of this year, so therefore pretty severely outdated, because in May they ran the series finale of Succession. My wife, Bianca, friend to both of you, and I were very sad when the series finale aired. So we started watching it again at episode 1, season 1, and we're almost done with this full rewatch. And I think it's one of the best pieces of television, and maybe one of the most incredible pieces of art that's been produced in recent memory. It's not easy because the characters are so obnoxious, but they do this brilliant thing where the characters are on one level like incredibly mendacious and Machiavellian, and but why you stay with it is because they also have these soft underbellies, and they have this humanity and these moments of decency that are like followed up a scene later with a shiv into the kidney of some other character unsuspecting at the moment. And there's also like some, I don't know if this is deliberate or not, but there's some Dharma woven throughout. I mean, there's this the patriarch of the show is this guy named Logan Roy, who's has his own traumatic background and goes on to become like a Rupert Murdoch-like figure with a Fox News, a news organization that's just pumping venom into the body politic. And at one point, somebody talks to him about like drawing a line somewhere, and he says, "Nothing is a line. Everything everywhere is always moving." And there's another moment where one of Logan's kids, who's he's got his head up his own ass, and he's quoting spiritual texts, and his little brother says, "Yeah, okay, Buddha, nice Tom Fords." And it's just, the show, it's beautifully shot and incredibly acted. I mean, just to watch it again, to see the subtleties in the performances and also the density of the writing. There are things that I could watch it. My wife was saying the other day, Bianca was saying the other day, we're not going to do this, but I could start again.
Wow.
So anyway.
And I think because it's created by a Brit, right?
Yes.
Jesse Armstrong.
Yes, Jesse Armstrong. Yes.
It's a real commentary on America.
It is.
Like that only an outsider could bring to that level of
Yes.
scrutiny. That is, it's fascinating.
And it feels, even though it's satire, it feels real. It feels like, oh, this must be a little bit what it's like to be in these rooms where these people are making these extraordinarily important and impactful decisions out of almost uncut venality. You know, it's like an ego. I haven't been in those rooms, but it feels like it could be accurate in some, if not exact way, some larger way.
I'm going to take back what I just said about only an outsider could say this, although it is kind of an outsider-insider view, because I'm really obsessed with Reservation Dogs.
Oh yeah, it's a great show. I love that show.
It's an amazing show.
Amazing.
It's the first all-native production in the U.S., and that show is a huge commentary on this country and the crimes of its origin and continuation, and it is hilarious.
It's hilarious, yes.
It's so smart. It's so funny. It's so tender. So if people haven't seen that, check it out. It's on Hulu and FX, I think.
I love the ghost character.
Oh,
that guy.
Young warrior.
He's awesome. The best part, for my money, the best part of that show. All right, it was such a pleasure to be with you guys. You're the best.
Always friends, always.
Love you guys. I mean, really, really grateful to you for doing this. Want to remind everybody, if you want to call in and ask life advice from people you shouldn't be getting life advice from.
Call it practice advice.
Yeah, practice advice.
Let's keep it in the realm of
Call it magical advice.
Hey, magical. If you want to get more magical, talk to Sebene.
You're really selling this, guys. 508-656-0540, 508-656-0540. You can send us voicemails or voice memos at podcast@10%.com. Again, all that info is in the show notes. Don't forget, we've got our inaugural meditation party IRL at Omega, which is a little bit outside of New York City. It's coming up in October. We'll put a link to buy tickets. I think there are only like a dozen.
Only 20 left last I heard.
Whoa,
in person.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's online too.
Yeah, you can buy tickets to watch. Anyway, we have no idea what we're doing. So we're going to try to figure that out in the interim, but in the months that or what is it, like a month and a half before we have to do this thing?
It's coming up.
Yeah. But if it goes well, we're going to do lots more. Actually, we've sold so many tickets that they've already asked us to do another one the next year. But if it really goes well, and we're having fun, I think we could start doing quite a bit more of these. So come join us virtually or IRL. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Thanks again to Seb and Jeff. Love those guys. Really love those guys. Thank you to you. Love you as well. I mean, I couldn't do any of this without the listeners. If you want to do me a solid, here I am asking for a favor after praising you. But if you want to do me a solid, go give us a rating or a review on your favorite podcast player. It really does help with all the algos. And thanks most of all to everybody who worked so hard on this show. 10% Happier is produced by Gabrielle Zuckerman, Justine Davey, Lauren Smith, and Tara Anderson. DJ Kashmir is our senior producer. Marissa Schneiderman is our senior editor, and she has been the brains behind this whole meditation party experiment. Thank you, Marissa. And Kimmy Regler is our executive producer. We get our scoring and mixing from Peter Bonaventure over at Ultraviolet Audio, and our theme music was written by Nick Thorburn of the band Islands. We'll see you back here on Monday. We're kicking off 2 weeks of episodes all about the Dharma of work. We're calling the series Sanely Ambitious, and I'm going to interview a bunch of top experts about some fascinating things like balancing happiness and ambition, boosting your calm quotient without losing your edge, finding work you love on your own terms, how to integrate mindfulness into your day at work, and how to handle big emotions at the office. Our first guest is a guy named Simone Stalzoff, author of a new book called The Good Enough Job. So that's coming up on Monday. It's a great series. I think you're going to like it.